Hey everyone! Welcome back to another episode of English Elevate Express. Today, we're diving into a topic that, let's face it, just about everyone has some experience with, opinions on, or questions about dating. You know, the ups, the downs, the awkward first dates, the surprising connections, and, of course, the occasional, what was I even thinking moment.
Oh, yeah. Been there. Been there a few times, actually, and probably still learning every
Yeah,
day.
dating has changed so much. From meeting someone organically, like through friends, to apps that basically set you up with a total stranger based on what? A few swipes and maybe a shared love of coffee?
Right? It's pretty wild. And there's so much to talk about. Dating do's and don'ts, finding confidence, handling rejection, even how to have fun in the process. So, today we're going to dive into it all and share our own experiences, laughs, and maybe even some advice along the way.
So get comfy, maybe grab a cup of coffee or tea, and join us as we navigate the crazy, hilarious, and sometimes heartwarming world of dating. Here we go. So, Alex, let's just dive in. What was your very first date like?
Oh man, my very first date, it was painfully awkward. I mean, I was so nervous. I don't even think I looked her in the eye the whole time. I was just like studying my menu.
Oh no. So, were you like really young? High school age, maybe?
Yeah, I was 16, and it was one of those situations where friends set us up and we went to a coffee shop. I didn't know what to talk about, so I just kept asking her about school, and I don't know, I think I even asked her about her favorite color.
The classic favorite color question. It's funny because as teens, we have no idea what to say. But actually, sometimes I think adults aren't that much better at first dates either.
Oh, for sure. And now with apps, people try to avoid that awkwardness by having all these icebreaker questions in their profiles. Like, what's your go to karaoke song? Or, do you believe in aliens?
I've seen some really funny ones. I think someone once asked me, if you were a fruit, what fruit would you be? I was like, is this a test?
It's creative, though. Sometimes I feel like icebreakers actually help get past the small talk faster, which I'm all for. Like, I'd rather just dive into a real conversation than spend half an hour on the basics.
Exactly. So, what about now? When you go on dates, do you still feel that nervousness or are you more comfortable?
I think it depends. I'm more comfortable with just being myself? Like, I'm okay if the conversation isn't perfect or if I say something awkward. But yeah, I still get a little anxious if it's someone I really want to impress.
Totally relatable. There's something about trying to put your best foot forward while also being authentic. It's like, I want to be myself, but I also want to be the best version of myself.
Exactly. And I think everyone has a dating persona at first. Like, we all kind of try to act a bit more polished than usual. But eventually, it's better to just let that go.
Right. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to keep up a dating persona forever. The real you is going to come out, so you might as well be yourself from the start.
Absolutely. And you know what else? I think sometimes people put too much pressure on the perfect first date, like it's some big audition. But really, dating should be about just enjoying the time together, right?
100%. I mean, think about it. Some of the best dates are the ones where you're just laughing, talking about anything and everything, and actually getting to know each other.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be a fancy dinner or some grand plan. Sometimes it's just sitting in a park, talking, sharing a snack. That's so much more memorable than a perfectly planned date.
I agree. So, let's talk about some do's and don'ts. What's a big don't for you when it comes to dating?
That's a good one. I'd say don't treat it like an interview. You know what I mean? Like, don't just fire questions at the other person like you're checking off a list. Let the conversation flow.
Yes, it's all about balance. Asking questions is good, but if it's one-sided, it starts to feel like a Q&A session, not a date.
Exactly. And what about you? What's a big do for you on dates?
I'd say be genuinely curious about the person. Like, actually listen to what they're saying and engage with it instead of planning your next question or worrying about what you'll say next. So, speaking of being yourself, I feel like that's way easier said than done. Do you ever feel like there's a pressure to, I don't know, perform a little on a date?
Oh, totally. Especially with online dating. You only have that one date to make an impression before they decide if they want to see you again. It's like, I'm not trying to win an Oscar here, but I definitely feel like I need to be on my A game.
Yes. And sometimes you get so focused on being impressive that you forget to relax. I remember going on a date once where I was so preoccupied with coming across as put together that I barely paid attention to what he was saying.
Been there. There was one time I spent way too long planning what to wear, only to realize halfway through the date that I didn't actually care about the person's vibe at all. I was just trying to impress someone I wasn't even into.
Exactly. It's like sometimes we get wrapped up in trying to make it work that we ignore those little cues that maybe this just isn't the right fit. Like, it's okay if there's no spark. Not every date is going to be the one.
Right, actually, I think that's something that took me a while to learn. Not every date needs to go somewhere. Some can just be fun experiences or, hey, even funny stories to share later.
Yes, the funny story dates are the best. I went on one where the guy brought his dog, which was adorable until the dog ended up eating half of my meal when I wasn't looking.
No way. Did he even apologize? Or was he just like, that's my dog's appetizer?
He just laughed. He thought it was hilarious. I mean, the dog was cute, so I couldn't even be mad. But I left that date pretty hungry.
See, that's a perfect example. That date might not have led to anything, but it's a great story. Plus, you probably learned something from it, right?
Absolutely. I learned to keep an eye on my plate if there's a dog around. But seriously, dating is full of moments like that. Some sweet, some ridiculous, some you learn from. Even the bad dates teach you something.
Yeah, they really do. I remember going out with someone who spent the entire time talking about his ex. I didn't even have a chance to get a word in. It was like a one-man show, and I was the audience.
Oh no, that's the worst. I think everyone's been on at least one date like that. The whole still hung up on the ex situation. Yikes. That's a clear do not pass go for me.
Exactly. But at least it helped me realize how important it is to be in a good place emotionally before dating. Like, if you're still healing, that's okay. Just maybe don't subject a date to that.
So true. I think being self aware is a huge part of dating, and it's one of those things that people sometimes overlook. If you're going on dates to fill a void or distract yourself, it usually doesn't work out.
Right, because that stuff eventually comes up, whether you're aware of it or not. And honestly, it's way better to know what you want and don't want before dragging someone else into it.
Absolutely. So, have you ever had a date where you felt like, wow, this person might actually be someone I want to keep seeing?
Yeah. There was one girl I went out with a few times and we just clicked. Like, we had the same goofy sense of humor, and I didn't feel like I had to try to impress her. I could just be myself. It was so refreshing.
I love that. So, what happened?
Life happened, I guess. She got a new job out of state, and it just didn't make sense to try long distance after only a few dates. But honestly, it gave me hope that people like that are out there.
That's such a good perspective. Sometimes, even if things don't work out, it's nice just knowing that you can connect with someone on that level. It makes the search feel worth it, you know?
Exactly. It's like dating isn't just about finding someone right now. It's also about finding yourself, figuring out what makes you happy, what you're willing to compromise on, and what you're not.
So true. And I think that's why I've come to appreciate the process more. Even when it feels frustrating, it's still a chance to learn about myself and grow. It's almost like dating is its own kind of self care.
Totally agree. So let me ask, what's your biggest must have in a relationship? Like, what's non negotiable for you?
Hmm, I'd say kindness. That might sound obvious, but it's really important to me that someone is genuinely kind, not just to me, but to other people too. If I'm with someone who's rude or dismissive of others, It's a big red flag.
That's a good one. It's easy to focus on chemistry, but kindness is such a foundation for everything else. For me, I think it's honesty. If I feel like someone's not being real with me, even about little things, I start to check out mentally.
Honesty is huge. And it's not just about telling the truth, but also being upfront about intentions, feelings, and even fears. I think that's what builds real trust.
Right. And dating isn't easy. Sometimes honesty can feel a bit scary, but without it, you're just building on shaky ground.
Exactly. So, do you feel like dating has gotten easier or harder over time for you?
Easier for sure. I think with age, I've learned to relax more and not put so much pressure on the whole dating outcome. Like now I just go with the flow a bit more and focus on having a good time.
Same here. I used to overanalyze everything. Like, if someone didn't text back right away, I'd spiral. Now I'm just like, if it's meant to be, it'll happen.
It's funny, I think we all start out so idealistic about dating, and then reality kind of humbles us a bit. But in a good way, I feel like I'm more open to different kinds of people now too.
Definitely. I used to have a type, but now I'm realizing that type is really about character, values, and how someone treats me, not about some checklist of traits.
Exactly. I think that's a good takeaway for anyone listening. Don't get too caught up in finding someone who fits the list. Sometimes the best connections are with people you'd never expect.
Yes, so true. And honestly, dating is hard enough as it is, so being open minded can really help make the process more enjoyable and less stressful. You know, speaking of being open minded, I think a lot of us have had to adjust that way with online dating. Like, it really challenges you to think about people outside your usual type because profiles only tell you so much.
Exactly. I feel like online dating is a weird mix of being picky and open minded at the same time. On one hand, you're swiping based on a picture and a few lines of text, but then you have to actually go into a date with an open mind and not too many
So
expectations.
true. I think my biggest issue with online dating is that it can feel, I don't know, like shopping sometimes. Like you're just scrolling through people, and it's so easy to lose that sense of connection.
Oh, totally. The whole swipe culture makes it feel like people are replaceable sometimes. And it's weird because you don't get that same feeling when you meet someone organically?
Yeah, meeting someone in person has this energy that just doesn't come through in an app, like body language, eye contact, even just the vibe of how they carry themselves. You miss all of that online.
Right. And sometimes people seem way different in person. I've been on dates where I thought, this is going to be great. We have so much in common. And then, in real life, there's just nothing there.
Same. I once had this amazing text conversation with a guy for like a week, and I was so excited to meet him. But then in person, it was like crickets. It was so disappointing.
I think that's one of the risks of online dating. You can get along so well in writing, but sometimes the chemistry just isn't there in person. I guess that's why I try to meet up sooner rather than later if I'm interested, before I get too invested.
That's a smart approach. I think waiting too long can build up expectations, and then it's harder to feel okay if it doesn't go anywhere. Plus, sometimes it's just better to rip the band aid off and see if there's something there.
Exactly. And even if it's not a match, you usually learn something. I think one of the best things dating teaches us is resilience, like learning to be okay if things don't work out.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, getting ghosted or turned down used to really bother me. But now I just see it as part of the process. Like, it's not a reflection of my worth, it's just not a fit.
I'm with you on that. Rejection used to hit hard, but I think the more you experience it, the more you realize it's not personal. I mean, we're all looking for someone who fits us, and sometimes it just doesn't click.
And honestly, it's a relief sometimes. Like, I'd rather be with someone who genuinely wants to be with me than try to convince someone to like me. If they're not into it, then it's better to know sooner.
Yep, I think of it like this: every no gets you closer to a yes with someone who actually clicks with you. So I try not to take it to heart and just keep moving forward.
Love that. So let's talk about something lighter. What's one of the funniest dating fails you've had?
Okay, this one's pretty bad. So, I once went on a dinner date, and as soon as we sat down, she started talking about how she only eats raw foods. I'm talking like salads and smoothies only.
Oh no. Did she try to make you order raw food too?
No, thankfully. But I'd already ordered a burger, and when it came, I could just feel her judging me with every bite. She kept making comments like, wow, that looks greasy.
That's rough. It's hard enough to eat in front of someone on a date, but to be judged for it? That's next level awkward.
Yeah, I just finished that burger as fast as I could. I'm all for people eating how they want, but maybe don't make your date feel like a monster for ordering a cheeseburger.
I totally agree. It's like we're all a little nervous on dates already. No one wants to feel judged for their food choices. But hey, at least you got a funny story out of it.
Exactly. And it makes for a good laugh now. What about you? Any epic fails?
Oh, definitely. There was one time I showed up for a coffee date, and he was already sitting down looking very serious. As soon as I sat, he started a discussion about his 5 year plan. He had this whole timeline for his life: marriage by 30, kids by 32, retire by 55.
On a first date? That's intense.
I know. I mean, it's fine to have a plan, but it was like he was interviewing me for the position of future wife. I couldn't get out of there fast enough.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot. I feel like one of the big dating don'ts is coming on too strong like that. Like, it's great to know what you want, but maybe don't hit someone with it on date one.
Exactly. I think it's about pacing. You don't need to pretend you don't want a relationship, but there's a balance. Sometimes people forget that dating should be fun, not just a way to check off life goals.
Totally agree. And I think when you're genuinely enjoying someone's company, you end up having those bigger conversations naturally over time. Like, you'll get there. No need to rush it.
Definitely. So, if you could give one piece of advice to people listening who are out there dating, what would it be?
Hmm. I'd say don't be afraid to put yourself out there, even if it's a little uncomfortable. The best connections come from taking a chance and being open. And remember, if a date doesn't go well, it's not the end of the world.
Love that. Mine would probably be don't settle. It's easy to feel pressured, especially when everyone around you seems to be pairing up. But wait for someone who genuinely makes you happy. It's worth it.
Great advice. And hey, just enjoy the process. Dating can be stressful, but it can also be fun if you approach it with the right mindset.
Absolutely. And remember, we're all in this together. Dating's tough, but it's also one of the best ways to learn about yourself and others. So embrace the journey, awkward moments, and all.
Here's to more awkward moments, great conversations, and hopefully a few love stories in the making.
Here's how we can integrate real life examples that add depth to Sarah and Alex's conversation. I'll weave in personal anecdotes that reflect typical dating experiences, and I'll include past conversation elements to keep it cohesive.
So, remember how we were talking about the awkwardness of dating and not knowing if there's a spark?
Oh, yeah, and how online dating makes it so easy to swipe through people and never really know what you're getting into. It's like we're all on a giant people shopping app sometimes.
Totally. Well, I actually had a real lack of spark experience recently. I was texting this guy, and we were having the best conversation. Witty banter, deep talks. So naturally, I got pretty excited for our date.
Let me guess. The date didn't live up to the hype?
You nailed it. We met up, and it was just flat. I couldn't believe this was the same guy I'd been messaging. No eye contact. And every time I tried to start a conversation, he'd give these one word answers. It was like pulling teeth.
That's the worst. It's almost like they send their fun version in text and forget to bring it to the date. But I get it. Sometimes nerves can take over too.
True. And I try to be understanding of that. But there's a difference between being nervous and just not trying. It made me realize how important it is to get to the date quickly, before we build up this idealized version of each other that's impossible to live up to.
Absolutely. I had a similar experience with a girl from a dating app. We were texting for days, getting into these deep philosophical chats. And then when we met, she barely talked. It was like meeting a completely different person.
Maybe it's one of the pitfalls of online dating. People can hide behind a screen and be a certain way, but then in person, the true vibe comes out.
Exactly. That's why I try to set up the first date sooner now. Keep it light, just to see if we have that spark face to face.
So smart. Honestly, I think getting together quickly helps keep the mystery alive and also stops us from reading too much into things before they're even real.
And speaking of reading into things, do you ever have those moments where you think everything is going great on a date, but then they just disappear?
Oh, ghosting. Yeah, I think that's basically a rite of passage these days. I had this one girl who I thought I had an amazing connection with. We went out twice, and everything seemed great. Then, poof, gone.
Oh, that happened to me once too. We had such a fun time, and I thought for sure he'd text me afterward. But days went by with nothing. It's like you're left wondering what went wrong.
I've been there. It's such a confusing feeling. But I think ghosting is actually a pretty clear answer. It tells you exactly where they stand, even if it's an awful way to find out.
True. I've learned to take ghosting as a blessing in disguise. If someone's not invested enough to communicate, then I don't want to waste my time either.
I think that's a healthy approach. It hurts in the moment, but it's better than being with someone who isn't fully in it. And I had this one experience that changed my perspective on ghosting.
Oh, really? What happened?
Well, I was seeing this girl, and we'd been on maybe 4 or 5 dates. I thought things were going well, but I wasn't totally sure I wanted to pursue it seriously. Instead of ghosting, though, I decided to be upfront with her and just told her that I didn't feel the connection I was hoping for.
Wow, that takes courage. How did she react?
She was super understanding, actually. And I think both of us felt a lot better having that closure. It made me realize that honesty, even if it's uncomfortable, is so much better than just disappearing.
That's refreshing to hear. I think everyone could use a little more of that honesty. It's such a mature way to handle things, and it spares both people from overthinking.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, it's awkward to tell someone you don't feel the same, but it's a lot kinder in the long run. Plus, I think it's just part of dating. Not every connection is going to work out, and that's okay.
I totally agree. I think if we're all just a bit more transparent about where we're at, dating would feel a lot less like a guessing game.
Absolutely. And speaking of honesty, have you ever been on a date where someone was too honest?
Yes, I went out with a guy once who started telling me all about his last breakup and his ex's flaws. It was like an open therapy session. I was so taken aback.
Oh no, that's a big no-no. It's like everyone has baggage, but maybe don't unpack it all on the first date.
Exactly. I think everyone has a story, and I appreciate honesty, but there's a time and place. On a first date, I want to get to know you, not hear about your past heartbreaks.
Right. It's about striking that balance. You want to be real, but not too real right out of the gate. Let people see your best side first.
Totally. Dating is like an unfolding process. Each date, you peel back a layer and get to know someone more deeply. No need to rush it all on date one.
You know, all this talk makes me realize just how much we've learned from dating over the years. I mean, think about it. A few years ago, I wouldn't have had any of these perspectives.
Same here. I used to get so caught up in the fairy tale side of dating, thinking every date could be the one. Now, I'm much more realistic, still hopeful, but grounded.
I think that's the best approach. Dating can be fun if you see it as a journey, not a destination. You meet people, learn from them, and maybe one day you find that person who just clicks.
Yes, and even if you don't find them right away, you're still building skills, learning what you want, and becoming a better partner yourself.
Exactly. Here's to all the good dates, the bad dates, and everything in between. They all teach us something, right?
Amen to that. And hey, maybe next time we'll both have some new stories to share.
What's the biggest mistake you think people make on a first date?
For me, I think the biggest mistake is oversharing, or getting too intense too quickly. I went on a date once where the guy just dove into his past relationships, career regrets, and even some family drama within the first hour. It was like, whoa, slow down. I get that everyone has a story, but the first date should be more about lighthearted connection, not going deep into emotional territory.
I totally agree. I think oversharing can kill the vibe because it feels too heavy. And it's not even about hiding who you are, it's just pacing. I like to think of it as peeling back layers. You can still be open, but let's save the deep stuff for later. Another big mistake I see is people not being present, like checking their phones constantly. It makes you feel like they're not interested, even if they are.
Oh, I hate that. Being present is so important, especially on a first date when you're trying to figure out if there's a connection. Just showing that you're interested in what the other person has to say can make a huge difference.
How do you handle ghosting?
Ah, the age old ghosting issue. It's definitely not fun, but I try to see it as a blessing in disguise. If someone isn't willing to communicate, then I don't want to be with them anyway. It's disappointing, sure, but I remind myself that ghosting says more about them than about me.
Yes, it used to bother me a lot more than it does now. At first, I'd overthink everything. Did I say something wrong? But now I realize that sometimes people ghost because they don't want to have a tough conversation or they're just not mature enough to handle things properly. Either way, I try not to take it personally.
Exactly, and I think once you understand that, it's easier to just move on and focus on the people who are actually interested in getting to know you.
Do you believe in the one? Or do you think there are multiple people out there who could be a good match?
Honestly, I used to believe in the one. But as I've gotten older and dated more, I've come to think that there are probably multiple people out there who could be a great fit. Timing, circumstances, and where you both are in life can make a huge difference.
I totally get that. I think the idea of the one can put a lot of pressure on dating. It makes it seem like every relationship has to be perfect or it's not the one. I like to think of it as finding someone who's the right fit for you at the time. People grow and change, so I think there are probably different people who can be your one at different stages in life.
Exactly. I think it's more about finding someone who makes you happy and with whom you can grow, rather than putting all that weight on one person to fulfill everything you want.
What's your take on dating apps? Do you think they're good for meeting people, or are they too superficial?
I have mixed feelings about dating apps. On one hand, they're great for meeting people outside your usual circle, especially if you're busy or new to a city. But on the other hand, they can feel superficial. You're judging people based on a few pictures and a short bio, which doesn't give the full picture.
Same here. I think dating apps can be great if you use them with the right mindset. Like, it's about keeping an open mind and understanding that profiles only show a fraction of who someone is. But it's easy to fall into the habit of just swiping mindlessly or being too picky because there are so many options.
Exactly. I think the key is to remember that these are real people, not just profiles. If you go in with a lighthearted approach and don't take it too seriously, it can be fun. But if you're expecting to meet the one right away, it can be frustrating.
How important is physical attraction when you're dating someone?
I think physical attraction is definitely important, but it's not everything. I've dated people who I wasn't immediately attracted to, but over time, as I got to know them, I found myself more drawn to them. I think attraction can grow when you connect with someone on a deeper level.
I feel the same way. Initial attraction can spark interest, but it doesn't sustain a relationship. I'd rather be with someone who I connect with mentally and emotionally, even if they're not what I'd call my type physically. The best relationships I've had were with people I found attractive in a way that went beyond looks.
Exactly. I think when we focus too much on looks, we miss out on people who could be amazing partners. So now, I try to keep an open mind and give people a chance, even if they're not what I usually go for.
How do you handle it if you're not feeling a connection, but they are?
That's such a tough one. I've learned that honesty is really the best approach, even if it's uncomfortable. I used to try to just drift away, but that always left things messy. Now, if I'm not feeling it, I try to be direct and kind, like, I've enjoyed getting to know you, but I don't think we're a match romantically.
I totally agree. I used to dread those conversations, but I found that people appreciate it when you're upfront. And I think if we all did that more often, dating would feel a lot less confusing.
Yeah, because dragging things out isn't fair to anyone. It's respectful to let someone know how you feel, even if it's not what they want to hear.
Do you think people should wait until they feel totally ready to date or just go for it?
I think waiting until you feel completely ready could mean waiting forever. None of us are ever really fully prepared for relationships because they challenge us in ways we can't anticipate. I think it's about being in a good place emotionally and being open to growth.
Couldn't agree more. I think being ready just means you're open to learning, open to being vulnerable, and willing to work on yourself. If you wait until you feel 100% ready, you might miss out on great connections.
Exactly. Dating itself can teach you so much about what you need, what you're ready for, and who you are. Sometimes the best growth happens when you're in a relationship, not before it.
What's the most surprising thing you've learned about yourself through dating?
Honestly, I learned that I can be really stubborn. I have this tendency to stick to my type or my list of qualities, and it's closed me off to people who might have been great matches. Now, I try to be more flexible and less stuck on a specific image.
That's so interesting. For me, I realized I can be a bit too forgiving. Like, I'd make excuses for people's behavior when they weren't treating me well, and I thought I was just being understanding. But now I see that sometimes it's okay to have boundaries and expect respect.
It's amazing how dating shows us parts of ourselves we might not see otherwise. And it's those lessons that really make dating worth it, even if it doesn't always end in a relationship.
Absolutely. It's like even if a relationship doesn't work out, you come away with a better understanding of what you want and need. And that's just as
What
valuable.
advice would you give to someone new to dating?
I'd say keep an open mind and don't take things too personally. You're going to meet people who don't vibe with you, and that's okay. It's part of the journey. Just go in with the goal of learning and enjoying the process, not putting too much pressure on yourself.
That's great advice. I'd add, don't be afraid to be yourself. Sometimes we try to mold ourselves to what we think someone else wants, but the best connections happen when we're just being real. Be confident in who you are and trust that the right person will appreciate you for it.
And remember, dating is supposed to be fun. It's an opportunity to meet new people, learn about yourself, and maybe find love along the way. Don't forget to enjoy it.
How do you think past relationships shape how we approach dating now?
I think past relationships definitely shape us. After a breakup, I usually take some time to reflect on what went wrong and what I could have done differently. My last relationship taught me that I need to speak up for what I want more instead of just going with the flow. So now I make a point to be clearer about my boundaries.
Do you think social media impacts dating and relationships?
Social media is a huge factor these days, both in good and bad ways. On one hand, it makes it easier to meet people and stay in touch. But on the other hand, I think it can create a lot of insecurities and comparison. Like, you're seeing other couples highlight reels and wondering why your relationship isn't picture perfect.
Oh, for sure. I think social media can make you feel like everyone else has this perfect relationship, which isn't realistic. It's easy to forget that most people only share the good parts. I've learned to take what I see online with a grain of salt. I don't let it make me feel bad about my own relationship status.
Totally. And it can also lead to issues with boundaries, like posting about each other or tagging each other in everything. I had an ex who was big on social media, and she'd get upset if I didn't post about her or like her posts. It created this weird pressure.
That's tricky. I think having a conversation about boundaries with social media is important in any relationship now. Some people like to share everything, while others prefer to keep things private. As long as both people are on the same page, it works.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, Real connection isn't about how many posts we make or followers we have. It's about how we're with each other in person. So I try not to let social media define my relationships.
What's your opinion on long distance relationships? Are they worth it?
Long distance is tough, but I think it can work if both people are really committed. I did long distance with someone for about a year. And while it was challenging, we made it work by setting boundaries and scheduling regular visits. It requires a lot of trust and communication.
I agree, it's definitely possible, but it's not easy. I think you have to be clear about your goals and what the long term plan is. Like, if there's no end in sight, it can get frustrating. I had a long distance thing once, and while we were both invested, it eventually fizzled because we didn't see a future together.
That makes sense. I think a lot of it comes down to having that light at the end of the tunnel. Knowing that you'll eventually be in the same place helps keep the relationship going. But if it's just a perpetual long distance thing, it's tough to maintain that closeness.
Absolutely. Long distance teaches you a lot about patience and trust, but it's not for everyone. If both people are willing to put in the effort, though, I think it can work.
Do you believe in love at first sight, or do you think love grows over time?
I'm not sure I believe in love at first sight, but I do think you can feel a strong connection with someone right away. For me, love is something that builds over time, once you really get to know each other.
Same here. I think love at first sight sounds romantic, but in reality, love is more about how you handle the ups and downs together. Infatuation can happen right away, but love takes time and effort to build.
Exactly. I think there's a difference between attraction and love. You can feel attracted to someone instantly, but true love involves knowing their flaws and choosing to be with them anyway.
That's well said. I think when people rush into relationships based on that initial spark, they sometimes miss the deeper connection that only comes with time. So I'm all about letting love grow naturally.
How do you know when you're truly ready for a committed relationship?
That's a tough one. For me, I think you're ready when you're comfortable being on your own and you're not looking for someone to complete you. If you're content with yourself, you're more likely to build a healthy relationship with someone else.
I totally agree. I think being ready means you're not bringing unrealistic expectations to the table. You're able to share your life with someone without expecting them to fill all the gaps. It's about complementing each other, not completing each other.
And I think being ready also means being willing to compromise and work through conflicts. Relationships aren't always easy, so you have to be prepared to put in the effort.
Definitely. When you're ready, you're willing to be vulnerable, communicate openly, and grow with someone else. That's when a relationship can really thrive.
Do you believe that opposites attract, or is it better to be with someone similar?
I think it can go both ways. Opposites can balance each other out, but it depends on the people. If you're too different, it can lead to constant conflicts. I dated someone who was super introverted, and I'm more social, so we had some challenges there.
Same. I think opposites can attract, but only if there's a shared foundation of values. I once dated someone who was my opposite in almost every way, and while it was exciting at first, we struggled to find common ground.
That's a good point. I think having similar core values and goals is more important than being similar in personality. You don't have to be exactly the same, but you should be aligned on the important stuff.
Exactly. I think a mix of similarities and differences makes for a dynamic relationship. You learn from each other, but you're also compatible where it counts.
What's your biggest pet peeve when it comes to dating?
Oh, that's easy. Mine is when someone is rude to service staff. It's such a red flag because it shows how they treat people when they think it doesn't matter. If they can't be kind to others, it's a deal breaker for me.
Same here. I once went on a date with a guy who was super rude to the waiter. I couldn't see him the same way after that. Kindness is a must for me. Another pet peeve of mine is when people talk about themselves nonstop without asking anything about me. It just feels one sided.
I know what you mean. It's like they're not even curious about who you are. They're just there to impress you with their resume. A little humility and genuine interest go a long way.
How do you balance being honest with not hurting someone's feelings in dating?
That's such a tricky balance. I think honesty is key, but it doesn't have to be brutal. I try to be gentle with how I phrase things. Like, instead of saying, I don't feel anything for you, I'd say, I don't think we're quite the right match. It's still honest, but less harsh.
I love that approach. I think honesty with empathy is the best way to go. You don't want to sugarcoat things to the point of giving someone false hope, but you also don't need to be blunt and hurtful. I try to think about how I'd want someone to break it to me if the roles were reversed.
Exactly. It's all about treating people with respect. Dating can be vulnerable, and nobody likes feeling rejected. So it's nice to be compassionate when you're delivering hard truths.
And I think people appreciate that, even if it stings initially. In the long run, honesty done kindly is better than stringing someone along.
What's the most important quality you look for in a partner?
For me, it's emotional intelligence. I want someone who can understand their own feelings and communicate them, and who can also empathize with mine. It makes navigating conflicts so much easier.
Couldn't agree more. Emotional intelligence is huge. For me, I'd also say openness. Someone who's willing to try new things and grow together. It keeps the relationship interesting and prevents us from getting stuck in routines.
Yes, openness is so important. When you're both open to growth, the relationship can evolve over time, which I think is the key to lasting love.
Absolutely. I think if you have those core qualities like emotional intelligence and openness, a lot of other things just fall into place.